My name is Sunita Patel, and I'm sitting in my car outside the Whole Foods in Austin, Texas, hiding from Mrs. Desai, who just walked into the store and who will undoubtedly call half the local Indian community within minutes to report my exact location, what I'm wearing, and whether I looked appropriately ashamed about the divorce scandal that has consumed every Indian household, temple gathering, and WhatsApp group from Dallas to Houston for the past 8 months. At 29, I'm a successful emergency medicine physician who should be focused on saving lives and building my career, but instead I spend my days calculating which grocery stores, restaurants, and social spaces I can visit without encountering members of the Indian American community that once embraced me as their golden daughter and now treats me like I'm carrying a contagious disease of moral failure. I grew up in Plano, Texas, in the heart of one of America's largest Indian American communities, where success stories like mine were celebrated and held up as examples of what immigrant families could achieve through hard work, sacrifice, and maintaining strong cultural values. My parents, Dr. Raj and Mrs. Meera Patel, were respected members of the community. My father was a successful cardiologist. My mother was active in temple committees and cultural organizations, and our family was frequently cited as a model of how to balance American opportunities with Indian traditions. I excelled academically, attended medical school at UT Southwestern, and married Vikram Shah, another doctor from a prominent Gujarati family, in a lavish wedding that was attended by over 800 guests and discussed in the community for months afterward. For 5 years, Vikram and I were the poster couple for successful arranged marriage and cultural integration. We both had thriving medical careers, owned a beautiful house in an upscale Dallas suburb, and participated actively in community events, religious festivals, and cultural organizations that connected us to our Indian heritage. Our wedding photos appeared in Indian American magazines, our professional achievements were highlighted in community newsletters, and our families basked in the social status that came from having children who had achieved the American dream while maintaining strong cultural ties. But behind the perfect facade that satisfied community expectations, our marriage was quietly disintegrating under pressures that I couldn't discuss with anyone in our social circle without risking judgment and speculation. Vikram and I had fundamentally different values about gender roles, career priorities, and family planning that became increasingly incompatible as we both advanced in our medical careers. He expected me to prioritize his career advancement over my own, to manage all household responsibilities regardless of our equally demanding work schedules, and to begin having children immediately, even though I wanted to establish my practice before starting a family. The conflicts weren't dramatic or abusive. They were the slow erosion of respect and compatibility that happens when two people realize they want different lives but are trapped in a marriage that represents their family's dreams and community expectations rather than their own authentic choices. We tried marriage counseling, but Vikram was resistant to changing traditional expectations about wives' roles, and I was unwilling to sacrifice my career ambitions to maintain harmony in a relationship that felt increasingly suffocating. When I finally made the decision to file for divorce after 18 months of unsuccessful counseling and growing unhappiness, I knew that I was detonating a bomb that would destroy not just my marriage, but my entire social and cultural identity within the Indian American community. Divorce was not just personal failure, it was family shame, community scandal, and evidence of moral corruption that would reflect poorly on everyone associated with me. I was about to transform from a success story into a cautionary tale about what happens when Indian women become too American and abandon traditional values. The community reaction was swift and devastating. Within days of filing divorce papers, news of our marriage breakdown had spread throughout the Dallas-Fort Worth Indian community like wildfire, with details being shared, analyzed, and judged in temple conversations, dinner parties, and WhatsApp group chats that I was no longer included in. The narrative that emerged painted me as a selfish, career-obsessed woman who had destroyed a good marriage because I was unwilling to fulfill my duties as a wife and had been corrupted by American feminist ideas that prioritized personal ambition over family harmony. Vikram, meanwhile, was positioned as the victim of my unreasonable expectations and cultural betrayal. His family and their social network portrayed him as a traditional, family-oriented man who had tried to make the marriage work despite having a wife who cared more about her medical career than her responsibilities as a daughter-in-law and future mother. The gendered nature of community judgment meant that while he was seen as someone who deserved sympathy and support, I was viewed as someone who had brought shame to both families and set a dangerous example for other young Indian American women. The ostracism began gradually but escalated into complete social exile within months. Temple events that I had attended regularly since childhood suddenly felt hostile. Conversations would stop when I approached, invitation lists to community gatherings excluded me, and longtime family friends would avoid eye contact or offer strained, uncomfortable pleasantries before quickly moving away. The aunties who had once praised my achievements and held me up as an example for their own daughters now whispered about my mistakes and used my situation as a warning about the dangers of giving daughters too much independence. The professional impact was almost as devastating as the social rejection. The Indian American medical community in Dallas is relatively small and interconnected, with referral networks, hospital affiliations, and professional opportunities often flowing through cultural and family connections. Several senior Indian doctors who had previously mentored me and offered career guidance distanced themselves from the divorce scandal, apparently concerned that association with my controversy might affect their own reputations within the community. I lost out on opportunities to join established medical practices that were influenced by community politics and social connections. My parents, who had been pillars of the community for decades, suddenly found themselves defending their daughter's choices and managing their own social fallout from my divorce. Other parents would make pointed comments about how modern, child-rearing approaches led to ungrateful children who abandoned traditional values, or would express exaggerated sympathy for my parents having to deal with the embarrassment of a divorced daughter. The stress affected my father's health and my mother's mental well-being, creating guilt that added another layer of pain to my already difficult situation. The gossip machine operated with ruthless efficiency and creative interpretation of limited facts. Stories about the reasons for my divorce became increasingly elaborate and judgmental, with community members speculating about affairs, financial problems, mental instability, or secret Western lifestyle choices that had corrupted my character. I was accused of being influenced by non-Indian friends, of prioritizing career over family due to selfish ambition, and of failing to respect Vikram's authority as head of household. None of these narratives were accurate, but truth was less important than the community's need to explain my behavior in ways that reinforced traditional values and warned other women against similar choices. The surveillance aspect of community life became unbearable as every public appearance, social media post, or personal decision was scrutinized for evidence supporting various theories about my character and motivations. If I looked happy, it proved I was callous and didn't feel appropriate remorse for destroying my marriage. If I looked sad, it confirmed that I was experiencing the natural consequences of bad choices. If I socialized with non-Indian friends, it demonstrated that I preferred Western values over cultural loyalty. If I avoided community events, it showed that I felt guilty and knew I had behaved badly. The breaking point came during Navratri celebrations when I attended temple despite months of social ostracism, hoping to find some connection to the cultural and spiritual traditions that had always been central to my identity. Instead, I found myself completely isolated during community dancing and celebrations, with people literally stepping away when I tried to join group activities. When I approached a group of women my age who had once been close friends, they turned away and continued their conversation as if I wasn't there. The message was clear. I had been excommunicated from the community that had shaped my identity and values since childhood. That night, I made the decision to leave Dallas and relocate to Austin, where I could build a new life away from the suffocating judgment and surveillance of the Indian American community that had once been my primary social and cultural identity. The move felt like exile from everything familiar, but it was the only way I could escape the psychological prison that community gossip and judgment had created around my life. I accepted a position at Del Seaton Medical Center and began the process of rebuilding my personal and professional identity in an environment where my divorce wasn't the defining characteristic that shaped every interaction. The first year in Austin was lonely and disorienting as I struggled to develop new social connections and find sources of cultural identity that didn't depend on approval from the Indian American community. I had to learn how to exist as an Indian American without the institutional support and cultural reinforcement that community membership had provided since childhood. I found myself questioning aspects of my identity and values that I had never examined before, trying to separate authentic cultural connections from toxic community dynamics that had become destructive rather than supportive. The healing process began when I connected with Dr. Priya Mehta, a therapist who had grown up in the Indian American community and understood both its positive aspects and its potential for psychological damage through gossip and judgment. She helped me process the trauma of social ostracism and develop strategies for maintaining cultural identity while protecting myself from toxic community dynamics. Cultural communities can provide belonging and support, but they can also become instruments of control and punishment, she explained. Your job is learning to take what serves you while rejecting what harms you. Through therapy, I began to understand that the community's reaction to my divorce reflected their own fears and insecurities rather than objective moral judgment about my choices. Many of the people participating in gossip and ostracism were trapped in their own unfulfilling marriages or family situations, but couldn't acknowledge that reality without threatening their own social standing. My divorce represented a dangerous possibility that traditional expectations might be questioned and that individual happiness might be prioritized over family and community approval. I also started connecting with other Indian American professionals who had experienced similar community judgment around divorces, career choices, or lifestyle decisions that didn't conform to traditional expectations. Many of these relationships developed through professional networks rather than cultural organizations, creating support systems that combined cultural understanding with freedom from community surveillance and control. These friendships helped me understand that my experience wasn't unique and that many people had found ways to maintain cultural identity while escaping toxic community dynamics. The decision to start dating after my divorce was particularly challenging because of anticipated community judgment, but it also became an opportunity to establish healthier boundaries around privacy and personal autonomy. I eventually met James, a non-Indian cardiologist who understood the pressures of medical careers and who respected my cultural background without requiring me to choose between personal happiness and family approval. Our relationship developed away from community scrutiny, allowing it to grow based on compatibility and mutual respect rather than external expectations or cultural performance. When news of my relationship with James reached the Dallas Indian community through mutual professional connections, the gossip machine activated with renewed intensity. The fact that I was dating outside the community was interpreted as final proof that I had abandoned Indian values and become completely Americanized. But by then, I had developed enough psychological distance and emotional support to recognize community judgment as their problem rather than mine. I had learned to separate cultural identity from community approval and to maintain connections to Indian traditions without requiring validation from people whose opinions had become toxic rather than supportive. The breakthrough in my relationship with my parents came gradually as they witnessed my increased happiness and professional success in Austin, compared to the stress and unhappiness that had characterized my final years in Dallas. They began to understand that protecting me from community judgment was more important than maintaining their own social status, and they started setting boundaries with friends and relatives who criticized their support for my choices. My father eventually told several prominent community members that they needed to stop discussing my personal life, and my mother began declining invitations to social events where my situation was likely to become a topic of gossip and speculation. Today, I work as an attending physician in emergency medicine at a major Austin hospital and have built a fulfilling life that combines professional success, meaningful relationships, and selective connections to Indian culture that enhance rather than constrain my identity. I maintain friendships with Indian Americans who support my choices and respect my autonomy, while avoiding community events and social situations that prioritize judgment over genuine connection. I've learned to be Indian American on my own terms, rather than according to community expectations that had become psychologically destructive. I've also become involved in supporting other Indian American women who are facing community judgment around marriages, careers, or lifestyle choices that don't conform to traditional expectations. Many of them reach out through professional networks or online communities, seeking advice from someone who has survived community ostracism and rebuilt a successful life outside traditional social structures. The conversations reveal that community gossip and judgment affect far more people than openly acknowledge these struggles, and that many women are trapped in unhappy situations by fear of social consequences rather than genuine commitment to cultural values. The experience taught me that cultural identity and community belonging are not synonymous, and that sometimes protecting your mental health and authentic self requires distance from social structures that claim to support you but actually function as instruments of control and surveillance. Indian culture contains profound wisdom about family, spirituality, and social responsibility, but it can be practiced and honored without submitting to community dynamics that prioritize conformity over individual well-being. Key resources and solutions that made the difference. Therapy with culturally competent providers who understand both the positive and negative aspects of tight-knit immigrant communities helps process trauma from social ostracism while maintaining cultural identity. Professional networks for minority professionals provide alternative sources of career support and social connection that aren't dependent on cultural community approval or traditional family structures. Online support communities for people facing cultural judgment create safe spaces for sharing experiences and strategies without risk of community surveillance or gossip. Legal consultation about harassment and defamation helps people understand their rights when community gossip crosses lines into actionable behavior that affects career or personal safety. Relocation services and career counseling help people rebuild professional and personal lives in new geographic areas when community judgment becomes psychologically unbearable. Boundary-setting workshops teach people how to maintain cultural connections while protecting themselves from toxic family or community dynamics that prioritize control over support. Cultural identity counseling helps people separate authentic cultural values from community expectations that may be harmful or outdated, allowing for selective cultural engagement. Interfaith and intercultural relationship counseling supports people whose personal choices don't conform to community expectations, but who still want to maintain some cultural connections. Today, when I meet other minorities who are struggling with community judgment and gossip, I tell them that cultural identity belongs to you, not to the community that claims to represent it. You have the right to practice your culture, maintain your values, and honor your heritage without submitting to social surveillance or toxic judgment from people whose opinions don't actually matter for your success or happiness. Sometimes the most culturally authentic choice is protecting yourself from people who use culture as a weapon to control rather than support you. Your mental health and personal autonomy are more important than community approval, and the people who truly care about you will support your choices even when they don't understand them.